The Boy in the Firehouse. Little Vernon Washington used to be a familiar figure around the firehouse in the large eastern city where he lived. He was seen there frequently, at least twice a week, because he was a little boy of 8, and like all other little fellows of that age, he liked to look at the shiny fire engines and talk with the friendly firefighters. But Vernon had still another reason for returning so often to the firehouse. He helped support himself by what he earned shining shoes. While it is true that a lad of 8 is somewhat tender in years to be out on his own earning a living as a boot black, Vernon was tough enough in a special sort of way. He had known hunger and privation, and grown up in the teeming, overcrowded slums, and all this had made him worldly, wise, and self-sustaining. So it was quite natural that his regular customers in the firehouse began to miss him when they no longer saw him coming around anymore. But no one knew where he lived or why he had stopped showing up to visit with them and shine their shoes. However, this was not the reason why the firemen did nothing to try to find him. They thought that little Vernon's folks had begun to do better financially, and hence made it possible for the serious-faced little boy to retire from business and buckle down to his studies. They hoped this was so because Vernon was always talking about retiring someday, when his mother and father found steady jobs and could afford to buy him the necessities he needed. At 11 o'clock on the morning of June 18th, 1954, after an absence of 5 months, little Vernon showed up at the fire station. He was greeted enthusiastically, and it was immediately noticed that he did not have his family's moonshine box with him. Although he had been anxiously trying to tell them something, the men laughed and joked and kept him from talking. When the excitement had subsided, he said in a terse voice that sounded strangely adult, "Please, Mr. Fireman, you gotta come quick. It's emergency. Old Mr. Clarence is bad off. You gotta help him." "Who's Mr. Clarence?" one of the men asked. "He's that old man who lives in the shed by the dump." The firemen exchanged concerned glances. "You were down there? What were you doing there, boy, eh? Playing hooky from school or something?" "No, sir. I was there. I seen it with my own eyes. Please, just don't ask me no more questions. Just hurry up before it's too late." The humor went out of the faces of the men watching. They hastily consulted the chief and received a nod to dispatch a fire engine. 3 minutes later, the fire team roared onto the city dump and leapt into action at once. They may have wondered how it had been possible for little Vernon to have walked or run all the way from the city dump to the firehouse in time to give the alarm. But there was no time for speculation. A roaring fire was encircling the ramshackle hovel in which old Mr. Clarence lived, and from the screams that were coming from inside, they knew that the man was trapped inside. Within a matter of minutes, the old man was rescued. A little while later, the fire was extinguished and an ambulance arrived to take him to a hospital for treatment of several slight burns. As he was being lifted into the ambulance, the fireman questioned about how the fire had started. Old Clarence explained that he had been removing some paint with lacquer thinner, and his cigarette had started the blaze. "Where was little Vernon, the shoeshine boy, when it happened?" "Little Vernon, you must be mistaken," was the reply. "I didn't see nobody at all around here. Besides, if you meant little Vernon Washington, it couldn't have been him. No? Why not? Because the poor little tyke got killed last month hooking a ride on the back of a bus, fell off and got run over by a car. Such a pity. I love that boy like he was my own kin. A terrible thing. Terrible. The firemen stood speechless at the ambulance as the ambulance drove away. They returned in the firehouse at a loss for words. Each man knew now that little Vernon Washington's appearance at the station had been something beyond human understanding. And when they investigated later that day, they learned that old Clarence had told the truth. Little Vernon Washington was dead. How the manifestation of the boy was seen and heard at the firehouse at 11 o'clock that morning may never be known. The firefighters who have been present avoid discussing it even now, but the fact remains that the life of the old recluse was spared by the apparition of a little boy who came back after death in time to give the alarm.